As always, the opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of DKI APCSS, the U.S. Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.
When I was with the police department, I was trying to get into an apartment that had a gun that I believe was involved in a murder case that I was working. And I had to make my informant reliable. So in order to make him reliable, I had to go with him in a bad part of Washington, D.C. and try to buy some drugs from him. And I'll tell you something. I think I'm pretty much of a tough guy, but I'm going to tell you, it's again, those undercover operatives, my hats are off to them.
From the Daniel K. Inouye Asia-Pacific Center for Security Studies in Honolulu, Hawaii, welcome to another episode of the Security Nexus webinar, where we explore the most pressing security challenges and geopolitical shifts shaping our world today. I'm your host, James Minnich, Colonel United States Army retired and professor here at DKI APCSS. It's a pleasure to have you with us for this insightful conversation in episode 17, Outlaw Empires, the Rise of Motorcycle Gangs and the Global Security Threat. Outlaw motorcycle gangs, or OMGs, are rapidly expanding their criminal empires, posing an escalating threat to national and transnational security. These organizations, often glamorized in popular culture, operate sophisticated criminal networks involved in drug trafficking, human trafficking, and cybercrime. Their impact on communities worldwide profoundly contributes to violence, corruption, and instability. OMGs originated in the United States post-World War II, formed by disillusioned veterans seeking camaraderie and adventure. Over time, these groups evolved into highly organized and structural criminal enterprises. Today, they are not just a domestic issue, but a global concern. OMGs have established chapters in numerous countries, creating extensive networks that facilitate illicit activities across borders. One of the most alarming aspects of OMGs is their involvement in the drug trade. They are significant players in the production, distribution, and trafficking of illegal substances, significantly contributing to the global narcotics trade. This involvement has led to violent turf wars, both in the United States and internationally, as these gangs vie for control over lucrative drug markets. Human trafficking is another dark facet of OMG operations. These gangs exploit vulnerable individuals, forcing them into prostitution and other forms of labor. The human cost of these activities is devastating, leaving victims with long-lasting physical and psychological scars. In the digital age, OMGs have embraced cybercrime. Utilizing advanced technology, they engage in identity theft, financial fraud, and other cyber-related offenses. This evolution highlights their adaptability and sophistication, marking them formidable adversaries for law enforcement agencies worldwide. The term outlaw motorcycle gangs became popular in the 1960s. Law enforcement and their media use this terminology to describe motorcycle clubs that engage in criminal activities and operate outside the boundaries of conventional motorcycling organizations like the American Motorcyclist Association, or AMA. The One Percenter label, which signifies these clubs' rejections of mainstreaming norms, originated from the AMA's purported statement that 99% of motorcyclists are law-abiding, with the remaining 1% being outlaws. The threat posed by OMGs extended beyond their immediate criminal activities. Their potential for domestic terrorism and political infiltration is a growing concern. These gangs have been known to engage in acts of violence and intimidation to further their aims, and their influence can extend into political spheres, corrupting officials and undermining governance. In the Indo-Pacific region, the presence and influence of OMGs are increasingly apparent. Countries like Australia, New Zealand, and various Southeast Asian nations are witnessing a surge in OMG activities. These groups exploit the region's strategic locations for drug trafficking, routes, and establishing alliances with local criminal organizations, exacerbating regional security challenges. To help us navigate this complex topic, we have expert guest Michael Will, a veteran investigator with decades of experience combating organized crime. Michael will reveal their inner workings of the OMG, their evolutions, and their extensive criminal activities. We'll discuss law enforcement's significant challenges in dismantling these illicit networks and the broader security implications. In this episode, we'll cover several key themes, including the origins of OMGs into sophisticated criminal empires, the security implications of their activity, the threat of domestic terrorism and political infiltration, global networks, and cybercrime expansion, specific threats in the Indo-Pacific region, and how communities can build resilience against these pervasive threats. The stakes are high. As we delve into these themes today, we aim to comprehensively understand the security dynamics and strategies to address them. Let's get started. Michael, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Super glad to have you here. I wonder if you might start by telling us your story, the journey that brought you here into this field.
I got about 40 years in law enforcement. Started out in Washington, D.C. With the police department. I spent 27 years there, retiring out of the homicide division, so I have extensive experience in death investigation and violent crimes. A couple of days after I retired from the D.C. Police Department, I entered on duty with the Department of Justice, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, ATF, where I got into firearms trafficking cases and outlaw motorcycle gang activity. I spent about 13 years traveling all over the world, teaching, supporting cases, doing surveillance, and I became what's been characterized as a subject matter expert on outlaw motorcycle gangs.
I'll have to tell you, before you and I started talking about this topic a couple weeks or so ago, I knew little, and I am learning so much, and I suspect that our audience, like me, will learn a tremendous amount today, and so excited for this. Maybe we'll start at the beginning, as it were, and talk about the outlaw evolution. These outlaw motorcycle gangs, I mean, they've evolved, as I talked about in the opening, from these rebellious social clubs to much more of a sophisticated criminal enterprise. And so here's the question. Maybe you could trace the historical evolution of these OMGs and explain the key factors that have shaped their current structures and their activities today.
Well, outlaw motorcycle gangs have been around a long time, almost 90 years if you start with the longest tenured outlaw motorcycle gang in the United States, and that being the Outlaws. They started in 1935. All the dominant clubs have been around since the 60s. To be more specific, the second oldest would be the Hells Angels, established in 48. The Pagans, established in 57. Then you had the Bandidos, established in 1966, and then the Mongols in 1969. So back in the 60s and 70s, they went from rabble rousers, personified by their bad boy image. They got into the drug activity. They were manufacturing and selling illicit drugs like crystal meth. But then it started to morph a little bit, where they weren't seen as the bad guys anymore. I think it started, in some part anyway, with the movie that came out, Easy Rider.
Yes.
That came out in 1969 or so, but it glamorized the outlaw biker culture, and people really got behind that culture.
Yeah.
I did some research on that movie, and it started out as a low budget, probably thinking it's going to fail type of movie. They spent $400,000, and it ended up making over $60 million.
Oh, wow.
So that tells me that the people really got behind the culture. So it went, as far as recruiting, it went from trying to recruit big burly bad dudes to folks that would do the best for the club.
Yeah.
They brought in people like computer experts. Not necessarily a real bad dude, but you could probably hold his own, but he had that expertise in computers, Same thing with financial matters. So they brought in folks, recruited folks that would help the club out as much as it could. And then it just kind of morphed from there.
Let's talk a little bit about then their illicit activities, the profits that they generate. I mean, they're doing this significant. I mean, the revenue is coming domestically, but internationally through these criminal activities that I spoke a little bit about. But what are their primary sources of income? I mean, would you say, and how do their illicit profits then impact local communities and global economies?
Well, the outlaw motorcycle gangs make a lot of money from the sale of illicit drugs, okay, and other illegal commodities. And they do that worldwide. There's a method to their madness in terms of where they migrate into, what parts of the world they migrate into. They just don't do it willy-nilly. There's a reason why they get into a certain area. On the flip side, a lot of outlaw motorcycle gangs, particularly the Hells Angels, make a ton of money, an absolute ton of money, on legitimate sales.
Do they?
They sell their wares, their names, logo, all that kind of stuff. They realized years and years ago, that there was a lot of money to be made by protecting their intellectual property rights. Yep. So they trademarked a lot of stuff to include their logo and their name. To my knowledge, there's at least 18 trademarks here in the United States, and there's another 12 that have been registered throughout. 12 countries have registered trademarks. So all that money that comes in is legitimately made. They're very, very protective of those trademarks. There was a guy back in the day, he was a very close friend of Sonny Barger. A lot of people think that Sonny Barger was the president of the Hells Angels. He was not. He was a president of a chapter, the Oakland chapter, but he was a very influential, probably no one more influential than Sonny Barger was. Anyway, he had a friend of his by the name of Fritz Clapp, and Fritz Clapp was an intellectual property attorney. Okay. And he's the one that's behind all the trademarks. And the Hells Angels, they didn't have any problem with going toe-to-toe with somebody that kind of overstepped their bounds and wanted to sell their wares. And again, the Hells Angels were so protective because their idea was that nobody other than them was going to make any money from their stuff. Yeah. So they filed a lot of lawsuits over the years, a lot of lawsuits, and they prevailed in every single one of them. But they just didn't, sue everyday folks like me and you. They sued some high-profile entities. Yeah. One of which was a high-profile rapper. He had his own clothing line, but he was selling the Hells Angels Death Head. It was something that was very similar to it. So he got sued. But you had Disney, you had Toys R Us, you had Saks Fifth Avenue, you had Redbubble, you had a lot of big corporations that got sued, and a lot of those monies that came in as a result of those civil actions went back into the club. Yeah. And in those instances where there was no money involved, it was strictly a cease and desist type of thing. But the Hells Angels made their point, so a lot of it was legitimate money that was being made.
Talk a little bit about the illegitimate money.
Well, of course they're into the trafficking. There is not only human trafficking but drug trafficking. But again, they've become, as we said from the start here, sophisticated, and sophisticated in the sense that the Hells Angels were smart enough not to do hand-to-hand anymore. They would use buffers, trusted buffers, like principal support clubs or street gang members that they trusted, to do the actual act of transporting somebody across state lines or transporting drugs across state lines or county or country lines. So they're involved in it, but they've taken a less hands-on approach.
They've insulated themselves.
Yes,
a little
they
bit.
have.
I've learned more in the last few minutes. Oh, this is going to be a wonderful episode. I want to transition a bit to talk about the threats and domestic and political at that. So, I mean, beyond the traditional organized crime, I mean, you tell us, but I think they pose a bit of a threat to domestic security through potential links to terrorism or political infiltration. I'm kind of thinking, you know, some of the groups that are hate groups and various things that maybe they exploit to advance some of their work. But talk a little bit about that, if you will.
Well, there's little doubt that they have people within their chapters that are, you know, white power type of individuals. The problem with it is that, and I don't want to keep busting on the Hells Angels, but it's just that I have a lot of general information on these other dominant clubs, but I have a lot of specific information on the Hells Angels because I looked at them a lot harder when I was with ATF, and they're the biggest club in the world. So I'm not trying to run them in the bushes. I'm just calling a spade a spade.
Yeah.
They do have people, you know, that use that white power ideology within their ranks, but they have a system in place where individual charters, some people call them chapters, but the Hells Angels call them charters, are allowing their club presidents to be completely autonomous. You run the club as you deem fit, as long as you stay within the club rules and bylaws, type of thing. So yeah, you do have charters out there that do have that white power type of ideology, but I think overall the groups like the Hells Angels are very patriotic. I don't think that they're out there to overthrow any governments, but they do have those type of folks within their ranks.
Okay, good enough. Let's talk a bit about then instability and maybe even regional instability. In the expanding presence of OMGs here in the Indo-Pacific region, I mean, it raised concerns about regional stability and potential conflicts. I mean, I know that from some research and whatnot that they're active in Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia, the Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, I'm sure other places. Mm-hmm. Certainly on the American continent, certainly in Europe and different places. I mean, it's a very active group of, as we've described, outlaws. And so let me ask you this question. What are the specific activities and impacts of OMGs here in the region, in the Pacific region, and how do they contribute to regional instability and security threats?
Anytime there's a new chapter that's established in an area or a region, let's just say for the sake of argument, Japan. It's going to lead to discourse with other clubs that are already in that area and mark their territory, as it were. It just always occurs every single time. So Japan started out, I guess, in 2014. They had their first chapter in the country. It was a nomad chapter. And 5 years later, they formed a Tokyo chapter, and then a couple of years later, they formed a third chapter, and that's where it is right now. So there's 3 chapters in that particular country. But who was the dominant club that was occupying, since it was so recent for the Hells Angels to establish those charters, it's very clear that there was somebody that was occupying those areas before. And as I said, there's going to be fights and worse over territory, and it's strictly over territory. Happens each and every time.
I was reading a little bit about in Australia. I think it was in 1984. They had a Milper massacre in a town there, and then I 10 years later, and that was, fight that went, and there was a 14, 15-year-old child that was, a bystander was killed, a number of people who were killed. It was extremely, you have an event like that happening in your city, and it's a challenge for, law enforcement agencies. And then we spoke a little bit before the show, the Quebec Wars that went on from, I don't know, for about 10 years from '94, and the number of people that were killed. I'm sure there must be several of these types of things that kind of go to your point. Is it can be a bit violent in areas.
Oh, it's extremely violent. It's a matter of time when you get two rival clubs in one area. It's just a matter of time before they get together and they fight it out. And in fighting it out, I'm not talking about we get into a boxing match. We're talking about shots being fired and whatever. But
and probably longer than just a bar fight.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit about global exploitation. OMGs play a significant role in the global drug trade. In fact, the Quebec Wars that I was mentioning, I think it was probably more local drug trade related, but these outlaw organizations, they have significant roles in the global drug trades and human trafficking networks, contributing to widespread exploitation and violence. So here's the question then. How do OMGs facilitate the trafficking of drugs and humans across borders? And then what are most effective strategies for disrupting these illicit networks?
Again, they're using insulators, buffers, to facilitate those activities, whether it's human smuggling or drug trafficking, to keep law enforcement on their heels. So they have no direct involvement, and it would take a lot more investigation to figure out that the Hells Angels were part and parcel to the problem. As far as what should occur to try to intervene, it all comes down to, in my opinion, street source informants. You keep their nose to the ground, give us the intel, as it were, and then we'll see if we can make a case. There's always people that are going to talk, but it's just a matter of is it going to be enough information to start a full investigation on what you're trying to do.
Are there examples of informants or those who have infiltrated that have been successful at what you're talking about?
Oh yeah, plenty of them, especially with, I'm intimately familiar with the infiltration part of...
Share a little bit.
Well, okay. The ATF undercover operatives over the past 10 years or so have successfully infiltrated the Mongols on more than one occasion, the Hells Angels, the Outlaws, the Pagans. These are successful infiltrations,
okay,
where a lot of people went to jail, a lot of evidence was recovered, a lot of drugs, firearms, bombs, all kinds of stuff. The Outlaws, a couple of times that they were infiltrated. Bandidos, we've had successful infiltrations of them as well.
When I listen to you describing the scope of these infiltrations, I can't help but think these have to be, the severity, the level of security threat that this is, because resources are always at a premium for everybody, and law enforcement is no different. They only got so many resources. They can only get after so many things. And when you do an infiltration like you spoke about, that can be a significant commitment of energy and time and resources, and it has to be because the payoff is perceived to be important.
Yes. Let me try to explain it a little bit further. You are absolutely right when you say that these infiltrations they drain a lot of resources. The manpower is draining, and if you decide, okay, what we're going to do is an infiltration, so there's a collective understanding this is what we're going to do. You have to have the buy-in from a lot of different people, especially upper level management, and typically the way it works is it's just not going to be the federal agency that has the buy-in or gives the blessing. It's going to be other agencies too, because you need that extra support. And the amount of money that is spent on these infiltrations is staggering because they go on for so long.
Yeah.
Typically, an infiltration will take probably 2 years.
Oh, wow.
So those are agents.
Yeah.
That are out there in an undercover status for that long. You have all the cover teams that are out there. There's probably scores of agents that are part of the cover team that they have to watch that UC 24/7. It doesn't matter what time of day or night.
Okay.
And then the money for purchase of evidence and for paying off, for paying informants and the like.
Yeah.
It's a staggering amount of money. I used to think that the management at ATF was sort of backing away from infiltrations because they thought they were inherently dangerous, and they are. They're very, very dangerous. Because if you're found out by some of these clubs, they don't have any issues in taking care of business. But then I think the real reason why they kind of backed off is that they didn't appropriate enough money. Because again, these investigations, these infiltrations are so expensive.
I'm going to pull on that just a little bit more, and we're talking about these investigative challenges. Yeah, money is an issue. There must be issues with having people who will take the risk and go under. I mean, this has got to be like life-changing to pretend you're somebody you're not,
Yes.
to take on a persona. There has to be. But I mean, talk a little bit about those challenges a little bit more. Clearly we've got people that are watching today that are in the investigative business. People who have issues with this think that they may take on some of this. But talk a little bit more about the challenges, investigative challenges, as you perceive them.
Well, I mean, in the United States, the FBI and the ATF, they do a lot of undercover type of operations all the time. As I said a little bit ago, they're starting to back away from outlaw motorcycle gang infiltrations, but that doesn't mean that they're not involved in undercover operations. They're always out there. They're buying machine guns. They're doing murder for hire type of cases. But the FBI is a little bit. I'm trying to think of the word, regimented.
Okay.
In that, I think it's every 3 or 4 months you have to have a meeting to where the supervisory special agents actually sit down and see where you're going with the case.
Okay.
Whereas with ATF, that may have changed since I left, but the way I left with it, they did have regular meetings, but it was just with their group supervisors and the case agents, and they kind of sat down and kind of went over, what direction we're going with the case. As far as the challenges that you're talking about, quite frankly, it takes a special breed of cat to do undercover operations. Those guys and gals are amazing, and hats off to them. When I was with the police department, I was trying to get into an apartment that had a gun that I believe was involved in a murder case that I was working, and I had to make my informant reliable. So in order to make him reliable, I had to go with him in a bad part of Washington, D.C. and try to buy some drugs from him. And I'll tell you something. I think I'm pretty much of a tough guy, but I'm going to tell you, it's again, those undercover operatives, my hats are off to them.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. I want you to tell a story. There is a a well-known case. A book was written about an undercover agent. You know more, without a doubt, than tell us the story. Who is this person who wrote that book about their undercover activities?
Well, there's a couple of them.
Okay.
But the one I believe you're talking about is it was an undercover infiltration of the Mongols in California. The agent who did the undercover was an agent by the name of William Billy Queen.
That's right.
And he went under for at least 2 years. He was in deep cover for 2 years. And he had some issues with it because after a long period of time, he kind of like didn't know what side he was on anymore. And so he needed some extra support from ATF. And ATF, quite frankly, didn't give him that support when he had some issues. As an example, I think it was when his mother or somebody very close to him died. He couldn't leave because of his status within the case. He couldn't leave to go back for the funeral, and so he got no support from his brothers and sisters at ATF, that he spent the previous 25 years with. But when he went back to the clubhouse, the Mongols clubhouse, they're all hugged up on him and giving him cards, and and so he's trying to run through his mind, which side am I on anymore, type of thing. But the case you're talking about is Queen was in a park in Southern California, and he's with a couple of his comrades, other Mongols, at least 3, maybe 4 of them. And they're all strapped and they're all carrying illegal stuff with them. And they see a police officer in a cruiser kind of inching towards them from a distance. And as he's getting closer, one of the Mongols says to the group, if this guy gets any closer, we're going to have to kill him. And so Queen is like, I'm not going to be involved in shooting a fellow officer. And as luck would have it, as in all cases, the protocol is, if you got an undercover out there, he's being monitored by case agents and other agents out there. There's a cover team, so they could hear what Queen was saying, and what he was saying was, they're going to kill this guy. Yeah. They're going to shoot him. So the case agent was quick on his feet. He called the dispatcher, and he asked the dispatcher to find out who it was that was in that park at that very moment. And once that unit acknowledged, to tell him to get out of there. And that's the only thing that probably was a good part of it, because Queen's thought was this: all right, there's going to come a time when I'm going to have to pull my gun, and if I have to, I'm going to shoot these other Mongols.
Right.
The case is over. It's over. But I'm not going to let that cop get killed. On the other side of it, Queen is thinking, when I pull my gun, that's the last thing that cop is going to see, and so he's going to kill me for trying to save that other officer. Yeah. So it was a really bad situation. It turned out well, but it just goes to show you that you go home that night and all these things are going through your head, and you have to you're just going to have to give him props for being able to think like that.
Yeah, no. Thanks for sharing that story. That was kind of located at a bit of a personal level on real people trying to do tough work on behalf of the community, each of us. Let's turn a little bit. Let's talk about money laundering. And I wonder, they use sophisticated financial mechanisms. You already spoke about how we've come lightning years away from how this all started. What are some of those ways that they launder the money, and then how can we disrupt that?
Well, they have legitimate businesses that they use to launder their money. They have real estate transactions that they make. They have massage parlors that they set up. countless different, construction sites, and body. I'm going to hire you for your bull and your brawn. You're going to be my bodyguard, type of thing, and it's all, at least initially, legitimate. The way to combat that, and as a cop that you're watching this faction of people that you think is committing a crime, and you're watching tons of people going inside that business establishment and doing really nothing, but you're smelling a rat. But in the United States, you have to have probable cause before you get a search warrant.
Right.
You can't go on your gut feeling. So the way I would step to it is if I couldn't get any other foot in the door, and there's a pun, I would call the IRS and I'd say, look here, this is what I need. I highly suspect this particular business establishment is laundering money. Why don't you bring them in for an audit? And those forensic auditors can find out a lot of things. So, and then if they find out that they're clean, then so be it. If they find out they're not, then fines can get levied, and and so it goes on and on. That's where I would start.
Going to move this forward a bit. We've talked a lot about how they are a threat to the community. I guess I might ask you, before we get off to the audience's questions, what can be done? What might communities do to be able to try to, protect their own communities, as it were? What would you suggest?
I'm not aware, to be quite frank with you, of any community-based entities out there that would like keep bikers from coming into the community.
Okay.
I'm just not. I think that outlaw motorcycle gangs aren't like street gangs. Street gangs are typically younger guys. They're easily influenced. They're easily swayed. Whereas outlaw motorcycle gang members, they are seasoned guys. They're hardened guys. They've been riding with subservient groups before, and they're just waiting to be picked up by a dominant club. So they're not going to be swayed by anything that's going on in the neighborhood. So, I'm sorry to say that, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah, no, you're probably right. I was thinking, maybe even sophomorically thinking, you'd have some type of campaigns that would local things that would say, if you're contributing to this, you're contributing to outlaw groups. So don't buy paraphernalia. Don't keep the young kids away from motorcycles, etc.
I think there's a little bit to that. I also think that it kind of works the opposite way, where the denizens of the neighborhoods are seeing the outlaw motorcycle gangs, they're seeing them, do things out there. They're doing runs. They're collecting money. They're giving right back to the neighborhood. So these people in the neighborhoods are seeing outlaw motorcycle gang members as sort of heroes because they're contributing to. So it kind of backfires. Does that mean that you should not, do your due diligence, pound the pavement, and get the word out? No, it doesn't mean that at all. But I think it's a stretch to think that you're going to do much of a bit of a good there.
Well, let's go to audience questions, and we've got several. I want to go ahead and start with deterring criminal infiltrations. And so I'd ask you, how should we deter the infiltration of criminal enterprises from them infiltrating?
I don't think you can. I think that if I'm just trying to be honest. I don't think you can deter it because I think that there's a faction of folks out there that if it's a money-making venture, they're going to make that money. If they think they can get away with it, they're going to go for it. And then you're thinking about, okay, the recidivism rate. You got people out there that have been arrested, rearrested, going to prison, coming back, rearrested. They don't care about going back to prison, so they're going to do what they have to do. They're going to do what they have to do.
You're presenting a
I hate to be a Debbie
right?
Downer.
Oh my goodness,
I know.
It is a bit stark. But well, let me ask you another one then. So, and recall this next question actually came from the Philippines, but I think it's applicable broader than that. And they're asking about intelligence vulnerability, and they're asking about how successful have outlaw motorcycle gangs gained inside access to police intelligence?
That is a good question. I'll tell you what I do know. The outlaw motorcycle gangs use friends, old ladies, just about anybody to strategically get themselves employed by a police department and a government agency, so they have access to databases that they can keep track of what law enforcement is doing. I know that for a fact.
Interesting.
There's a kind of a story I can tell about the. Some years ago, I was at a conference in the Midwest in the United States, and the conference was the International Outlaw Motorcycle Gang Investigators Association, IOMEGA. It's a big. In terms of membership, there's about 1,000 guys from all over the world that they do nothing but investigate outlaw motorcycle gangs. And so we were at this conference, and it was very tightly controlled because it's just the nature of being around. You have outlaw motorcycle gang activity going on around you. So in this particular case, there was nobody supposed to be in this hotel that we were in. We had about 400 guys there and gals. And about 2 days into that conference, right at the end of the day, we had this police officer who went to the bar in the lobby area of the hotel, and he had his computer with him. He just left class, and he saddled up and he started having a couple of drinks. And the next thing you know, this stunningly beautiful woman appears, and she saddles up next to him, and they engage in a conversation. And they started drinking heavily, and pretty soon she suggests that they go up to his room, which they do. Soon after they get up to the room, the woman distracts the officer just long enough for her to grab that laptop, and down the hallway she goes. As luck would have it, we had the ATF director there, and he was supposed to talk the next day, so we had added security in the hotel, all the different floors and on each level. And so they caught this gal red-handed with the computer. So they charged her, and they questioned her, and she confessed. And what she said was that she, a couple of weeks before the conference, she was stepped to by an outlaw motorcycle gang member who offered her a significant sum of money in exchange for stealing or acquiring some law enforcement intel by any means necessary. The outlaw gang member gave her the name of the organization, IOMEGA, and when they were going to be at this hotel. And they left it up to her to pick the date and time and the place that she was going to try to do what she had to do. So she gave all that up. And the good part about it is the laptop that was stolen had the information on about 200 guys, 200 law enforcement officers throughout the world, the personal identifiers and other important stuff on that computer. So if the biker club would have gained access to that, we'd have had some issues. So.
I'm always, when we tell a story, or when we know something, I always wonder, well, that's the one we know.
Yeah.
How many more
That's right.
are there, in fact? It's just, without a doubt, the proverbial, tip of the iceberg.
That's right.
The questions, I know you spoke at this, and I'm going to ask the question, it's coming in, but maybe I'll give you another way to answer it as well, because you've kind of commented about the difficulty with preventing these criminal acts, and that is the question. But maybe I'll ask it another way, and that might be, what can people do to kind of protect themselves? They live in a community, there are known 1%ers there, and they feel concerned about their own safety.
The way I would address that is that, by and large, outlaw motorcycle gang members, they have a place to meet, and people should stay away from those places. It's obvious when they come in, because they ride in packs, they back their bikes in, and inside the door they go, and they have their meetings. Sometimes they call them church meetings.
Okay.
And it's just a meeting of club business type of thing. They also have, these outlaw motorcycle clubs have saloons, bars that they frequent, and they kind of take over. So if you want to avoid getting involved in any kind of fisticuffs with an outlaw motorcycle gang member, you might want to avoid the bars that they frequent. It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
You can find a lot of places to throw down a beer.
I was, a few years ago, wife and I were visiting friends in South Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
And of course I've heard of Sturgis for a long time. Obviously small town there, but it's also a maybe annual gathering, periodic gathering of motorcycle club members that come through there, and just, in the thousands, I guess, are there. And this event was going to take place within a couple weeks of us being there, and so it was a little bit more prominent. Others here in our group here today perhaps have also heard of Sturgis, but don't know anything much more than that. I wonder if you just might share insights about what that is, what that means.
Sturgis is an annual gathering. It occurs every year in August. Sturgis, South Dakota is a small town, population maybe 7,500. It's in the western part of the state. Typically, there's about 450,000 motorcycle enthusiasts that descend on that little town. Ooh. And amongst that 450,000, and it's been up, I think it was the 75th anniversary of Sturgis back in 2015, there was over 700,000 there. And I supported that endeavor with ATF by doing surveillance there and keeping an eye on some of the outlaws, the outlaw gangs, for many years, 8 or 9 in a row. But there's 3 dominant clubs, outlaw clubs, that attend Sturgis every year: the Hells Angels, the Banditos, and the Sons of Silence. The Sons of Silence, they kind of stay to themselves, even though it's the Hells Angels against everybody type of thing.
Okay.
But they don't like to just get in the face of a rival club like some other clubs do. The Banditos, not so much. They'll throw down just as much as some of these other major clubs will do. But our job down there was to prevent crime, prevent assaults. We were out there and we were doing overt surveillance. We had badges around our neck. Everybody knew who we were. We had cameras, and we were taking photo images and video of both factions. One might be standing on either side of the street. The Banditos over here, the Hells Angels over here. And we knew that if we didn't get in the middle of them, there was going to be a clash. There's going to be a clash. So we in that respect, we kind of averted that stuff. And believe it or not, the outlaw motorcycle gangs, they do respect law enforcement as long as you respect them. I had a guy that from a Western major police department years ago tell me that we were at some kind of conference or some thing that we're at. I think it was a conference. And he made a comment that bikers were kind of stupid. And so I kind of pulled him off to the side and I said, I think you bumped your head, dude, because they're not stupid. They're very, very intelligent. They might look burly and not as intelligent as you might think that they are, but they are. So if you lost your mind, I'll help you find it, type of thing. So but there is that mindset, and some of that kind of spills over to where a cop will actually say that to an outlaw, and so what do you expect is going to happen?
Put a target on himself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no reason to antagonize anybody.
That's right.
It doesn't usually generate what we're thinking it will. Let's talk a little bit more. Next question is asking us about membership and recruitment. And so maybe you might just explain a little bit the typical stages of membership and how this process maybe helps maintain the club's cohesion and its society.
Okay. Most clubs start out with what they call a hang-around. And that's official title for these guys, hang-around. Some people call them slickbacks. And what that means is the person who wants to get in the club, he's brand new, he's wearing a leather vest with nothing on it. So they call it a slickback. So you hang around. You've already shown the president, vice president, sergeant at arms that you want to be a member of the club and you're willing to go through that climbing that ladder. So once they accept you, and they're going to do their own little background on you, they're just not going to take in anybody. So you probably have to do a hang-around status for about 6 months. And then from there you're elevated to a prospect or a probate or a probationary officer member. You'll do that for a year before you're even considered to be a full patch member. And during that time, that probationary time, it's not a good time for the prospect. He's ridiculed. He's given the most mundane jobs, all hours of the night. He's told, fetch me my beer, this type of thing. And they also, they're subjected to beat downs a lot. You didn't do something right, and you just get pummeled into the ground. And they're told to participate in a lot of interactions, clashes with rival clubs. They'll use a prospect to do that, and so they're trying to determine whether or not this guy has what it takes to become a full patch member of this club. So once you become, you do that year, you're voted in by the president. Then you receive your full patch status, and then you're able to vote. And then if you want to move up the ladder even further, you can be you can vie for a position as a road captain, as a secretary and a treasurer, as a sergeant at arms and vice president, and all the way up to the president. There's certain things that they won't tolerate. Whether once you become a full patch, and that is you just can't arbitrarily leave the club. You have to go to church. You have to go to one of these meetings, and you have to tell the membership why you want to leave. And then if the membership thinks that's a good enough idea, they might let you go out in what they call good standing, as opposed to be put out in bad standing. As an example, if a club member who's, let's just say he's a HA out of Minneapolis, and he goes to church and he says, I can't do this anymore. My son, they just found out he's got leukemia and he needs to go down to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. Yeah. And I can't keep going to these meetings. I have to spend my time with my son. Right. And that's why I'm asking to be let out of the club. So in that particular instance, they probably let him go. But if they said, no, you're put out in bad standing, then they have, there's a way that the HA reaches out to all the chapters throughout the world, and it lets them know that Michael Will, who used to be a member of this chapter, is now out in bad standing, effective this date, and you will not allow him to come into. So they wouldn't let me. They wouldn't have an opportunity, I should say, for me to leave Minneapolis and go to Antwerp or something.
Right.
You know,
It's not going to happen.
No.
Interesting. You know, it's the first time I'd heard the term slickback, but you described it.
Yeah.
But I am very familiar with another term which is quite similar that the Army has used, which was called slick sleeve. And so for those who hadn't served in combat, they didn't have anything on their sleeve. And they'd be called a slick sleeve. And you can see the, because instead of a combat patch being put there, a patch. As I'm listening to you, I can see,
There's similarities with the military.
oh my goodness, you know, 1982 when I first came in, and I saw a lot, and there were, you know, hazings and different things that happened back in those days too. I can, just listening to you, I can hear some. So let's talk a little bit. You've kind of taken us through. I'm going to go to this last question in the interest of time, and I'll just talk a little bit about gender and race dynamics, and maybe you just might talk about treatment of women and minorities in the OMGs. And it's probably even changed over years, like everything has.
Yeah, the treatment of women kind of varies from club to club. There's some clubs that treat women with a tremendous amount of respect, and there's other clubs who treat women like trash. The Outlaws, the women wear a patch on their vest that says "Property of James." And that telegraphs to all the members, not just in that chapter, but all the members. She's hands off. She's off limits. With respect to how they're treating black clubs, African American clubs, if you will, or multiracial clubs. Again, I'm going to go back to the Hells Angels. They're just now getting the memo that they're bringing in black members. Yeah. When I left ATF, I was only aware of one charter that had a black member. That might be changed now, but I kind of doubt it. Again, you know, it goes back to the charter president has the right to run his shop the way he sees fit, and if you got a bunch of bigots. Yeah. And white supremacists in your charter, you're not bringing in a black man. No, you're not. You're not going to do it. So, now, that's not to say that the African American and multiracial clubs haven't formed. Yeah. They've just ballooned exponentially in the last 10 years. There's several clubs. They're international clubs too. Wheels of Soul are some of the big ones. Chosen Few. Very big clubs. Violent clubs too. Yeah. Now some of those guys don't allow white guys to come in. Some of them do, but it just I'm not going to say it's unfortunate that they're not allowing blacks in because they do.
Because it's a bad club, right?
Right,
so
right.
We should not allow a whole lot of people.
That's right.
Yeah, no, I understand exactly what you're saying. Hey, I want to, before we let you go, because we're running out of time here, is maybe you might recommend a book or two to our audience.
There's two that I can recommend. I mentioned one a little bit earlier. It's the book written by Billy Queen.
Okay.
It's called Under and Alone. It's a true story of a undercover infiltration of the Mongols in Southern California. It's a really good read, and it'll send chills up and down your back. Yeah. When you see what the level of drama that agent went through. The second one is a book written by another friend of mine, Jay Dobbins. He was an agent in, he infiltrated the Mesa, Arizona charter of the Hells Angels. And he had with him his old lady, Jenna McGuire. So she played the part as his wife. Yeah. And very tremendous undercover operations between those two folks. that book is called No Angel.
Yeah.
And it's again, it's a true story, obviously, infiltration. And it was a case dubbed Operation Black Biscuit. The case agent was a big time hockey fan, and so he, they called the puck the Black Biscuit, so he dubbed it Black Biscuit. But those are the two books that I would highly recommend.
Michael, this has been extremely educational. I've been doing security and defense issues for 42 years, and I thought I knew quite a bit about those issues, but this is a whole nother area that I hadn't really considered until you and I talked a little bit ago. And so thank you for coming out today and sharing what you know with our audience. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah. As we wrap up, remember that informed communities are resilient. Today's discussion with Michael Will underscored the complexities and threats of outlaw motorcycle groups, highlighting the need for continued vigilance and strategic adaptability in the Indo-Pacific. We thank Michael Will for sharing his valuable insights and expertise with us today. Now, I encourage you to join us this Friday, June 7th, for our next Security Nexus webinar, Strengthening Social Cohesion and Resilience in Election Information Ecosystems. It'll feature Ed Flick and Megan Reinard-Gill. We'll discuss fortifying election information ecosystems and fostering social cohesion and resilience as we explore innovative strategies and best practices to counter misinformation and enhance public trust in this critical election year. From all of us at the Daniel K. Inouye Asia-Pacific Center for Security Studies in Honolulu, Hawaii, thank you for being part of this important conversation. I'm James Minnich, and until we meet again, aloha oe. As always, the opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of DKI APCSS, the U.S. Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.